don't speak. For we have another episode of the Top 10 Favorite, and from what I believe are the best performances of some of the greatest actresses of all time. Must you flirt? So press it. For I'm starting from 10 and then sensually staring into the camera until number 1. And always remember, I have seen every film attainable, folks. Keyword, attainable, of these artists. So every list here comes from the most truthful, sensual, and romantic accuracy. Yes, it is still Pride Month. I thought I could squeeze another top 10 video for this month for you all. And this is a top 10 that has been a long time coming, for we are talking about a movie star that really needs no introduction, because once you hear her name, your whole soul shakes with adoration. She is, of course, the mysterious lady, Greta Garbo. Born as Greta Lovisa Gustafsson in Stockholm, Sweden, nicknamed Kata, she had very humble beginnings, growing up in an impoverished home with hardworking low-class living parents with her 2 older siblings. She dreamed heavily of becoming something much more than what she was and immediately became fascinated in the theater. She always loved performing skits and doing amateur theater, but she had to work to provide for the family, so she never even went to high school. She got a job modeling hats, and then working in a barbershop rubbing soap on people, and then modeling women's clothing. She received enough encouragement to study at the Royal Dramatic Training Academy in Stockholm, catching the likes of MGM's Louis B. Mayer, and the rest, as they say, is history. When it comes to movie stars, ladies and gentlemen, you know, there never really has been and never will be a great movie star like there was with Greta Garbo, who has sincerely been argued as the greatest movie star of all time. Not only was she absolutely dynamic, sensual, sexy, magnetic, and heartbreakingly beautiful, she was a damn great actress, period. Being able to show vulnerability and inhabited strength and passion on camera like no other. She also remains one of the great victors of the transition from the silent pictures to the talkies, which had ruined a lot of stars, including her own partner at one point, John Gilbert. You can say because of her powerful ability to lure the viewer in with such dynamic and sexy eyes that she was able to survive and thrive through the Hollywood system, giving such heartfelt characters that experienced everything and felt everything that the audience felt. You look on any list and it will show that not only was she voted by the Guinness Book of World Records as the most beautiful woman who ever lived, but one of the greatest and most inspirational actresses in all of cinema. So hold each other close, folks, as we get started on the top 10 best performances of the Swedish Sphinx, La Divina herself, Greta Garbo. Now, starting at number 10, we have Mata Hari, which might be a shocker for you all, considering how exotic it is, with Garbo playing the legendary Mata Hari, the dancer who may be a German spy trying to dig up documents and dirt from Lieutenant Rosanov, played by Ramon Navarro, in Paris at the height of World War I. Question is, will she be caught? If you know the history, you know how that goes, but let me tell you, folks, I was always fascinated with this film, even when I was a kid. I first discovered this film specifically during a scene in Nickelodeon's film Harriet the Spy, starring Michelle Trachtenberg and Rosie O'Donnell. And there's a scene where they go to the movies, and this is the movie they go to. That was Nickelodeon in the 90s for you, which, I cherish those times. I'm a 90s kid, folks, I can't help it. So needless to say, I grew in fascination of the film, even more so knowing Garbo was in it, whom I already was aware of and captivated by her luscious, sexy power. Watching it again as an adult, this pre-code 92-minute version is quite a committed performance from Garbo, for which she was always so present. She always made herself available physically and mentally for every scene, which is why she was one of the greatest. She looks as much like Mata Hari as Anthony Hopkins looked like Nixon. But what was significant was her star power. You believed every word she said about her intentions, and we all loved her all the more for it. Number 9, romance. This may be a shocking placement, considering Greta Garbo's passionate performance here was technically her first Academy Award nominated performance for Best Actress. But if you have seen it, you understand how the film itself is not altogether epically amazing. However, Garbo's performance is quite lovely and yet quite melodramatic. Based on the play by Edward Sheldon, Garbo plays Rita, an opera singer who lives in the moment, but she happens to fall in love with Tom, played by Gavin Gordon. Things might change, but how can this be? She's having an affair with another man. Who really is having true romance here? The two major and strong things about this classic film is Garbo and the great director Clarence Brown, earning technically his first Oscar nomination for Best Director. The shots in this picture are really stunning, and even more stunning with Garbo in them, obviously. Garbo can slightly be over the top in this picture, which you can say works with her being an opera singer, but it is undeniable with how poetic she communicates her desire as Rita. One fun fact is that co-star Gavin Gordon was in a car accident on his way to set one day and didn't want to go to the hospital for fear of being recast. So he toughed it out, but after the first scene was in the can, he fainted. He woke up in the hospital and saw Garbo, assuring him the production would wait for him to heal. That's a beautiful action for a movie star at her stature at that time. Number 8, A Woman of Affairs. Now, this is clearly one of the greatest silent pictures of Garbo's career, with Greta giving such a powerhouse and devastatingly gorgeous performance as Diana Merrick, a lovely woman who has always been in love with Neville, played of course by her longtime screen partner and partner in real life, John Gilbert. But her family name has always been a separator between the two, so they have other relationships, always pining for each other. She becomes a widow, and her affairs bring her a freeing escape, but when the chance comes back around to be with Nevs, the affairs that she had could ruin her reputation and her future. Quintessential Garbo story with the right amount of romantic tragedy to steal your heart away. And with the great three-way partnership of Garbo, Gilbert, and Clarence Brown again, you have such a magnetic and yet melancholic picture with such beautiful imagery. My God, Clarence Brown was such an amazing director. Based on the novel The Green Hat by Michael Arlen, which was later made into a Broadway play, the screenwriters here had to water down the homosexuality and heroin use for the censors, obviously, even though the code wasn't even in effect yet. Screenwriter Bess Meredith earned an Oscar nomination, unofficially for her script adaptation, since this was the beginning years of the Academy Awards, but I say Garbo's performance in this classic should have been recognized, for she brings such a subtlety to the character of Diana that was much more mature than her earlier work in silent pictures, which even still had the strong air of maturity and grace. Number 7, Grand Hotel. Of course, ladies and gents, the classic Academy Award winner for Best Picture of the year, but more importantly, having the grand performance of Greta as the Russian dancer who just happens to be fading and contemplates suicide while staying at the most beautiful Grand Hotel in Berlin. But maybe a thieving visit from Felix, played greatly by John Barrymore, may help her overcome it and liberate herself with romance. This is obviously one of the greatest ensemble pieces ever assembled, thanks to Irving Thalberg gaining the rights from the novel and the play, and taking major risks assembling all of the big stars to this future box office hit. And every performance is just fantastic. Not a weak apple in the bunch, despite what Wallace Beery would say about poor Joan Crawford, who is truly sensational. This was a Garbo picture I distinctly remember, for she utters the most famous line, as we all remember, "I want to be alone," which practically became a mantra for her whole life, especially while she was working on set. Garbo indeed was known to creating mood and atmosphere of singularity on set, not having any outsiders come and watch her i.e. producers or new crew members, or practically anyone, because she was extremely self-conscious. She was extremely self-conscious about working with such a big star-studded ensemble, but she was convinced with the great big detail and honor of being the top billed star with only her last name, which really meant something. Her scenes of tragedy are brooding, mythical, and operatic, practically, and she commits to it with such heart. Her performance would be parodied a lot for years to come. I mean, even Carole Lombard doing a phenomenal interpretation, or you could even say homage to her in The Princess Comes Across, which is just pitch perfect. But Garbo's star power is on full display here, which encapsulates what was so electric and hypnotic about her. So much, we just can't leave her alone. Number 6, Flesh and the Devil. Oh my Lord, ladies and gentlemen. The film that honestly started it all, of the sensual, spellbinding prowess of Greta Garbo. Though not her first film, obviously, it was the breakout role in America that absolutely made her a star and had more people recognizing the image of Garbo for generations. Helmed by her most popular director, Clarence Brown, of course, we have another love triangle based on the novel The Undying Past, with star John Gilbert, a German soldier falling in love with Garbo, even though she's married. Funny she never mentioned that. But after a duel, he is sent to Africa while his best friend, Ulrich, played well by Lars Hansen, meets and falls in love with Garbo as well. What is Leo to do? Garbo was forced on a contract with MGM to make this film, even though she didn't want to. But once she met John Gilbert for the first time, he calling her Greta, but then she replying, "That's Miss Garbo." The fireworks were non-stop on set. Those two were practically clawing each other with heated passion. Even more than frickin' Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton were on set of Cleopatra. Reports have it that Clarence Brown would yell cut on a kissing scene, and he and the crew would just leave the set until she and Gilbert were finished. That's freedom right there. The two stars fell so deep in love with each other, Gilbert much more so, that he proposed to her, and she didn't exactly say yes or no. So a wedding was arranged with the press there all around, and Greta no-shows him at the altar. Absolutely devastating and embarrassing. It definitely could be because of her past relationship with Maurice Stiller. But Gilbert and Garbo still kept on working with each other and still respected one another, for true love did seem very visible, regardless. There is absolutely everything captivating about Garbo in this performance. Every subtle glance, every feline-like movement is so sexy, sultry, and full of hate that you think she was made for this. At the end of the day, Garbo walks away with this picture, resulting in it being a great hit for MGM and catapulted Garbo to superstardom, making more than any other actress at that time. Number 5, Anna Karenina. There's nothing like seeing everyone's favorite star step into the famous role of a brilliant Tolstoy novel that brings Garbo's fans such butterflies in their stomachs. Quite frankly, of all the interpretations of the famous character, Garbo has to be my favorite because there was a way to make Anna such a strong and empathetic character without seeming like a victim. And Garbo achieves that greater than all. Even though, do not get me wrong, Vivien Leigh's brilliant performance is totally up there as well. The nobility and pride that takes over Garbo's aura just lives within the character of Anna that makes it so much more interesting and heartbreaking. Garbo was so immersed in the character already, having basically played Anna in a previous silent abridgment with John Gilbert called Love, which is not a bad picture really. She was forced heavily by David O. Selznick to get out of this picture in order to do a film version of the play Dark Victory. But she refused, for this story is very much up Garbo's consistent alley. Worked out for Bette Davis though, didn't it? The film did moderately well at the box office, which is a clear statement that audiences were always up for the classic costume romantic tragedy, with Garbo tearing our frickin' hearts out. It's certainly clear to see why Garbo and Brown would make 11 pictures together total, and always counting on how a star can make love to the camera when trust is present. Number 4, Anna Christie. Specifically, the great 1930 film adaptation of the 4-time Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Eugene O'Neill's play in English, rather than the German language adaptation starring Garbo as well, which was produced the same year, which I have seen as well. Garbo is just as phenomenal in the German version with that ensemble as the American version, and it is worth checking out when you come across it on YouTube for free. But here, the MGM-produced version, directed by the one and only Clarence Brown, is truly astounding and captivating because of everything surrounding it, from its direction, its source material, its great ensemble cast, including the great Marie Dressler and Charles Bickford, but of course, Garbo, iconically in her first ever talking role and number 2, technically, of her first Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, nominated alongside herself for Romance that same year. The amount of anticipation audiences felt when they saw Garbo enter on screen and desired so heavily how she was going to sound with her first line, and the way she delivers that house-stopping first line, "Give me a whiskey, ginger ale on the side, and don't be stingy, baby." The utter sexiness and depth in her deep Swedish voice was more captivating than anyone imagined. Audiences were still surprised with the tone of her voice, but after a few more exchanges, they were absolutely under Garbo's alluring spell. Her performance is fantastic, with a dark past of growing up in a brothel and then reuniting with her estranged father. I mean, it's purely O'Neill, and the progression of her romance with Charles Bickford, a sailor who wants to marry her, is what really keeps us on the edge, for we can see in Garbo's eyes how much remorse she has, how much she yearns for a better future, but yet ashamed and afraid of any commitment, for she knows it probably wouldn't last long considering her dark past. Garbo gives so much grace to the role that you buy every word and aspect of it, and still to this day remains one of the great film adaptations of a play ever made, thanks to the commandingly performance by Greta Garbo. Number 3, Queen Christina. Yes, indeed, my friends, a surprise, but then again, not really. These next top 3 were astoundingly difficult, as you can imagine, because, my God, once you see the power of the leading performance of Garbo here, your heart explodes, especially given to the behind-the-scenes circumstances of Garbo's own sexuality, and a few scenes that are quite a great mirror to Garbo. It certainly hits closer to home for Garbo too, portraying Queen Christina of Sweden herself, one of the great and powerful rulers in the 17th century. However, things become even more interesting when she falls in love with a Spanish emissary, John Gilbert again, and she's faced with the burning question, do I choose royalty or true love? Garbo just dominates the screen with her boots and ruling class hat, really progressing sexual politics. The many scenes of strength she embodies is incredibly attractive and forceful, even by today's standards. Originally, Laurence Olivier was going to play Antonio, but couldn't feel the strength in him as a leading man yet. So she did John Gilbert a favor by stepping in, hopefully to revive his career, which had been failing, to no positive result. The film is fantastic, of course, but the most iconic shot, most likely in all of Greta Garbo's filmography, next to another one, which I'll talk about soon, is that brilliant final close-up of Garbo as the queen on the voyage set sailing. The most brilliant piece of direction director Ruben Mamoyan gave her was to think of nothing. That way, we had a blank canvas, and he knew just how striking Garbo's presence was. So she didn't need any Lee Strasberg backstory or sense memory in order to captivate our hearts in that moment, even within the context of the story. Seeing her in that final shot just represents utter power, strength, nobility, loss, tragedy, a positive future, and so much more. As they say, A picture is worth 1,000 words, and Garbo's pictures always said 1,000,000. Number 2, Ninotchka. Oh, the general appearance of this classic is not distasteful. Folks, how I wish this endearing, iconic, and final Academy Award nominated performance for Garbo to be number 1. Truly, it's basically tied with the number 1 spot. For like millions across the globe, this showcases Garbo in comedy like we've never seen a genuine movie star do, with the greatest marketing tool of Garbo laughs. You have audiences flocking with such love, adoration, and curiosity of Garbo in a comedy. Even though she doesn't actually laugh, she mimes it, and they have someone else dub her in post. If you've seen it, you obviously know the results. One of the greatest comedies ever made. What certainly cements its significance and brilliant results is the perfect direction from the master of innuendo, Ernst Lubitsch, and an Oscar-nominated screenplay by Charles Brackett and Billy Wilder, of course. I love the fact that Garbo was so timid to do this film because of how unsure her presence in a comedy would be. She was known for her romantic tragedies. How could a political romantic comedy be pulled off with her in the lead role? She had all the powers in her favor, building Ninotchka as a stern, emotionless Russian who is not at all touched by the romanticism of life, until Leon, played perfectly by Melvyn Douglas, inspires that life out of her. And slowly but surely, she starts to love life, not knowing she and Leon are legal enemies regarding the MacGuffin of the jewels that the Grand Duchess apparently stole. Garbo's sternness and straight face is what sells all the comedy, and how her force shield is slowly broken down is a beautiful and believable sight to see, with many in-jokes and references to her past successes. Like the phone call she has with Leon is done with a slight hint of satire, but in the context of the scene, it's so sincere and beautiful. Ninotchka was really a breakthrough for Garbo, for it showed audiences that Garbo was really much more than the leading tragic heroine, as phenomenal as she was. But she rightfully earned her Oscar nomination, even though we all knew she was never going to win it that year. Even though her success in comedy wasn't a consistent one, audiences around the world will always remember and cherish her performance here as one of her absolute greatest, with that iconic and memorable shot of her laughing, doing her best, chuckling a hearty laugh. Even having Premiere Magazine rating her performance as Ninotchka at number 25 in their 100 greatest performances of all time. All right, baby, here are some honorable mentions. Two-Faced Woman. Okay, now settle down here, folks. Put those lethal fans away for a second and just hear me out. Remember when I said comedy wasn't a consistent success for Garbo? Well, this is the only reason why. This film, directed by our beloved George Cukor, for God's sakes, was a doomed production, for the script was half-assed and slashed in half. So this was not the proper preparation for Garbo in this picture to make it, and her, a success. It wasn't Garbo's fault. I will be the first to say that. This is one of those cases where the studio saw what profit and success came from Ninotchka, so this was immediately in development for Garbo to star, rather than doing a film about Marie Curie, which was later made with Greer Garson in the role, of course. It's one of those classic stories, again, where a wife pretends to be her fictitious twin sister in order to win back the affections of her husband, Melvyn Douglas, once again, who left her for Constance Bennett. The problems with the film are manifold. Most of all, the dance scene is, yes, awkward as hell. Even claimed by a critic from Time magazine that, quote, "it is almost as shocking as seeing your mother drunk," end quote. All of the hate on this box office bomb is valid and true. However, speaking as an actor myself, I will always support the actor who did everything they could to make it successful, trying to believe that maybe this is how the American public would like to see me, like how Garbo did. But evidently, all audiences turned on her, so much that Garbo bought out her contract with MGM, and retired from acting when she was only 36 years old, never making another film again. Say what you will about this flop, I find lovely things and honorable effort from an actor who gave the effort, especially with it being a second comedy, and well, her last film ever. Susan Lennox, Her Fall and Rise. Oh my, what an interesting picture that still features a strong and powerful performance from Garbo as Susan, a Cinderella-like orphan who escapes the clutches of her humanitarian uncle Gene Herschelt, of all people, and then meets and falls in love with Rodney, played by Clark Gable, and thus begins a back-and-forth romance resulting in Susan's absolute need and desire for him. Not quite a film for today's standards of strong women, per se, based on a dated novel, even though it was quite risque at the time, but you have to admit the chemistry between Garbo and Gable is very enjoyable in their only film together, and for good reason, for they did not get along with each other. Big surprise. However, despite its slight filmmaking shortcomings, Garbo still shines like a beautiful diamond here. Conquest, another good partnership between Garbo and director Clarence Brown, based on the play and novel Pani Waluska, entailing the relationship and romance between Countess Marie Waluska and French Emperor Napoleon, played wonderfully by Charles Boyer in an Academy Award-nominated performance. Marie is pushed into starting a relationship with Napoleon, hoping it will help influence Napoleon in giving a certain plan and its independence. Garbo is very commanding in a role that you would think is more reserved for Napoleon, but the chemistry between Garbo and Boyer is astounding and works on every level, even in its very weak last half, which is very disappointing considering how strong and swift the first half is. However, Garbo makes every scene between she and Boyer interesting and captivating, that it certainly becomes one of the better partnerships on screen. The Kiss, which almost made it into the top 10, folks, I'm not gonna lie, and is significantly Garbo's and MGM's very last silent picture before making the transition to talkies. Silent pictures were already fading away at the point of filming, but MGM felt they still had strength and a sure winner from their favorite star, Garbo, with this story of dynamite adultery. The film was still a hit because even though silents were practically extinct, Greta Garbo wasn't, and her abilities as an actress are on brilliant showcase here that you again can't look away. It's like every scene is so brooding and so tragic and so hard to take that she gives it so much grace. It's so damn beautiful. The Painted Veil, an excellent film adaptation of W. Somerset Maugham's classic novel for one major reason: Garbo as our protagonist, Katrin, who agrees to marry a bacteriologist, played wonderfully by Herbert Marshall, even though there's no love there. They go to Hong Kong and, what do you know, a love triangle ensues where her heart flutters for another man, George Brent in this case. What lacks in the film script is made up with Garbo's giving portrayal of Katrin, and it's a much more satisfying character to portray, as well as a woman who always sought adventure, who always wanted more than this provincial life. No Beauty and the Beast this time, please. And she discovers a true calling to medicine. Though the ending is much different than the novel, and the two later film adaptations, The Seventh Sin and the 2006 adaptation with Naomi Watts and Edward Norton, this is by far the better film, for there has never been a star like Garbo to make us feel the love, feel the passion, and come alive right with her in the drama. Number 1, my dear, of course, Camille. You all know this was extremely difficult, an extremely difficult one, for it has been argued by hundreds and hundreds of Garbo fanatics and aficionados as her absolute finest and monumental performance on film, earning Greta her 3rd Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. She stars as Marguerite, a beautiful courtesan living about town in mid-19th century Paris. The thing is, Marguerite has a past, but she hopes the love of a famous and rich baron will solve all her problems, and after a bout at the theater, she mistakes the Baron de Vauville for Armand Duval, played wonderfully by the ever so striking Robert Taylor. Once she learns Armand is not of great fortune, she has to really wrangle with choosing love or security, on top of battling consumption. Based on the novel by Alexandre Dumas, this adaptation, produced by the great Irving Thalberg, was meant to be an adaptation of the time, especially when they had Garbo giving her absolute all on this one. Garbo, of course, was very picky on who was going to play Armand after hundreds of men. She absolutely had the gut feeling Robert Taylor was her man. But, classic Garbo, she kept Taylor at a distance, as she did for everybody. She absolutely hated it when the crew would just stare at her while she was acting. It was very much a stem of insecurity, but she was brave and smart enough to use it as fuel for vulnerability. And it shows just endearingly here as Marguerite, or Camille, rather. All of the scenes between she and Taylor are so sweet that it's easy to see why Daddy Warbucks and Miss Farrell were falling apart in the movie theater watching it in John Huston's classic Annie. Garbo was absolutely at her most beautiful here. And it was amazing how at this time, audiences really did not mind the fact that the character of Camille was really a prostitute. But with Garbo in the role, they just immediately fell in love with her. Spoiler alert, the final scene will always put everyone to tears between she and Taylor. And how Garbo just descends and crumbles in Taylor's arms is still such a heart-crushing moment that will always revitalize our love for classic cinema. I believe her performance is certainly the best example of how vulnerable and open she can be on screen. The film was a gigantic hit, and to this day, many cinephiles always look at her performance here as the #1 film associated with Garbo, myself included, which, how can you blame them? Especially with the loving fact that this was Greta Garbo's personal favorite film and performance of her career. It is truthfully tragic that we didn't get many more performances from Garbo after the failure of Two-Faced Woman. And it's not like the studios didn't try to get her back in front of the camera, being offered such monumental roles like The Picture of Dorian Gray, I Remember Mama, The Trouble with Angels, and even Sunset Boulevard. However, she remained in seclusion for the rest of her life, devoting her life to collecting art and living in New York, which became a great game of finding Greta Garbo, hopefully at a farmer's market, anywhere she could be around town. Being Pride Month this month, we have to honor the fact that Greta's relationships had been devoted both ways, but predominantly lesbian, especially with her loving relationship with writer Mercedes de Acosta, which is confirmed by over 150 loving letters and telegrams to each other, which are now collected at the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. Her love life never really remained so private necessarily, so we can say she was proud to love whom she loved, whether the relationship was with a man or with a woman. However, at the end of the day, she really emulated her iconic line. I want to be alone. And alone she was, with her friends and neighbors here and there, always having time to travel to her faithful Sweden and enjoying life in all of its simplistic beauty. She may have avoided the film industry altogether, but unlike a lot of the classic film female stars of the golden age, Greta Garbo left and retired on her own terms when she wanted to go. And she did it. And for that, I respect the artist way, way more for one of the greatest movie stars gave us beautiful performances and inspiration to live life how you wanted. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. And also at the same time, tell me folks, do you agree with these picks? What are your favorite and from what you dare believe are the best performances of the divine Garbo? Share in the comments below, talk to me like you never have before. If you like this, please click like, subscribe, and by all means, please become a member on the channel where you gain access to the movie reviews and free merch coming. Plenty more of film reviews to be coming along, but in the meantime, darlings, thank you so much for watching. Now please go away for now. I want to be alone.